I took some heat for that. What are you doing bringing Democrats in front of the judiciary? We brought them in because they care about the First Amendment. It was interesting. When RFK Jr. came in to testify, the Democrats actually made a motion to go to executive session. Kick everyone out. No journalists, no one was allowed. They wanted to kick everyone out, go to executive session so no one could hear what RFK Jr. was going to testify to in a hearing on censorship. You can't make this stuff up. We learned that on January 23rd. Well, think about that, by the way. We learned on January 23rd, 2021, maybe point this one out first, that there was an email. So the third day of the Biden administration, there was an email sent from the White House to Twitter which said, take down this tweet ASAP. And who had issued the tweet? Who had put out the tweet? RFK Jr. So you had the Biden administration trying to censor a fellow Democrat who was going to run against him in the Democrat primary. I mean, that is, and everything in that tweet actually were true statements. So we learned all that last year, and of course our investigation culminated with a letter from Mr. Zuckerberg on August 26, 2024 last year, where he said, yes, the Biden administration pressured us to censor. We did it. We're sorry, and we won't do it again. And Meta, Facebook, has now subsequently changed policy. They now go to the community notes policy instead of the, quote, independent fact-checker approach that was being used before. We had one other witness last Congress, journalist from Canada, Rupa Subramanya, who I thought said something that was really important. She said, free speech is a core value of Western culture. And that is true, and that's what our concern is. We're concerned about the attacks on free expression in Europe, the censorship, the arrest for offensive posts, the chilling effect it all has on speech. But we're more concerned, frankly, as Americans, about the limits the DSA, the Online Safety Act in the UK, put on Americans' First Amendment rights, and the shakedown. And I think that's the appropriate term, the shakedown of American tech companies under the DSA, the OSA, and the Digital Marketing Act Digital Markets Act in the European Union. These acts target our tech companies that provide the modern town square, and they are the engines of innovation in our global economy. Since the turn of the century, European tech companies have languished behind their American counterparts. European governments have tried everything to change this except what might actually work, deregulating their own economy and letting free enterprise flourish. Instead of cutting red tape and allowing their own companies to innovate
stuff that actually happened, and that's the truth.
Thank you. Mr. Price, the EU's Digital Services Act. In
minutes, I want to just take an opportunity, maybe before I even do an opening statement, to welcome everyone back. Hope everyone had a good break. The ranking member and I, along with a few other members, Mr. Kiley, Mr. Fitzgerald, Mr. Correa, I think Mr. Swalwell and Ms. Crockett all had a wonderful visit to, and Mr. Cohen, to Europe, where we talked about this issue, and we learned some valuable information then. So we look forward to today's hearing and hearing from our witnesses. But first, you got to listen to the chairman and the ranking member talk. On August 12th of last year, Thierry Breton wrote Elon Musk a letter. Thierry Breton's the commissioner in charge of enforcement of the Digital Services Act and the Digital Marketing Act. In the very first sentence, the guy in charge of enforcing this legislation passed by the EU writes this: Dear Mr. Musk, I am writing to you in the context of recent events in the United Kingdom and in relation to the planned broadcast on your platform, X, of a live conversation between a U.S. presidential candidate and yourself. So think about it. The guy in Europe in charge of enforcing a European Union law writes an American about an American company, about an American election, and he says the context for the letter, the reason for the letter, are events that are happening in the UK, a non-European Union country. That's not Europe trying to influence what happens here. I don't know what is. He goes on throughout the letter and says this: measures need to be taken to combat disinformation. He said this to Mr. Musk. We're concerned about any, quote, illegal content you may have. And he ends his letter by saying, my services and I, very last sentence, my services and I will be extremely vigilant to any evidence that points to breaches of the Digital Services Act and will not hesitate to make full use of our toolbox. So he ends the letter with a threat. So before the interview even takes place, he's threatening an American, running an American company about an interview regarding the most important election we have, election of the President of the United States. And again, saying the reason for doing so are events that are happening in a non-European Union country, the UK. Comments about events happening in the UK. Concerned about this, quote, spillover effect. That is why we're having today's hearing. That's why we went to Europe last month, or actually in July, to study this issue. Now, here's what's interesting. Mr. Breton, after he sends this letter, this committee sent him 2 letters, and then he suddenly resigns. We asked him to come today, but he refused to come. We asked him to send written testimony. He refused to do that. We asked him to appear. He just wouldn't come. I think it's important to remember what the House Judiciary Committee did last Congress. We investigated our government, the Biden administration, their attacks on free expression here in the United States. What Michael Schellenberger journalists called the censorship industrial complex. Big government, big tech, big media, big academia, all working together to censor Americans. And we learned all kinds of things in that investigation. We learned on April 27th of 2022 that the Biden administration had established a disinformation governance board. That's right. A bunch of bureaucrats going to get together and tell you what you can say, what you can tweet, what you can post, what you can read, what's misinformation, what's disinformation, and the new term they come up, what's malinformation. Thank goodness, because many of us raised concerns about that, they disbanded that disinformation governance board. We no longer had that. We heard from journalists like Mr. Schellenberger, like Matt Taibbi, regarding the Twitter files. We heard from Tulsi Gabbard. We heard from RFK Jr., all Democrats, frankly. In fact, I took some heat for that. What are you doing bringing Democrats in front of the judiciary? We brought them in because they care about the First Amendment. It was interesting. When RFK Jr. came in to testify, the Democrats actually made a motion to go to executive session. Kick everyone out. No journalists, no one was allowed. They wanted to kick everyone out, go to executive session so no one could hear what RFK Jr. was going to testify to in a hearing on censorship. You can't make this stuff up. We learned that on January 23rd. Well, think about that, by the way. We learned on January 23rd, 2021, maybe point this one out first, that there was an email. So the third day of the Biden administration, there was an email sent from the White House to Twitter which said, take down this tweet ASAP. And who had issued the tweet? Who had put out the tweet? RFK Jr. So you had the Biden administration trying to censor a fellow Democrat who was going to run against him in the Democrat primary. I mean, and everything in that tweet actually were true statements. So we learned all that last year, and of course our investigation culminated with a letter from Mr. Zuckerberg on August 26, 2024 last year, where he said, yes, the Biden administration pressured us to censor. We did it. We're sorry, and we won't do it again. And Meta, Facebook, has now subsequently changed policy. They now go to the community notes policy instead of the, quote, independent fact checker approach that was being used before. We had one other witness last Congress, a journalist from Canada, Rupa Subramanya, who I thought said something that was really important. She said, free speech is a core value of Western culture. And that is true, and that's what our concern is. We're concerned about the attacks on free expression in Europe, the censorship, the arrest for offensive posts, the chilling effect it all has on speech. But we're more concerned, frankly, as Americans, about the limits the DSA, the Online Safety Act in the UK, put on Americans' First Amendment rights, and the shakedown, and I think that's the appropriate term, the shakedown of American tech companies under the DSA, the OSA, and the Digital Marketing Act Digital Markets Act in the European Union. These acts target our tech companies that provide the modern town square, and they are the engines of innovation in our global economy. Since the turn of the century, European tech companies have languished behind their American counterparts. European governments have tried everything to change this except what might actually work, deregulating their own economy and letting free enterprise flourish. Instead of cutting red tape and allowing their own companies to innovate and grow, the EU and the UK are going after American companies that have grown to dominate the global tech landscape. Regulations like the EU's Digital Markets Act and the UK's Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act imposed burdensome requirements on U.S. tech companies while leaving their European counterparts untouched. But these attacks on American companies won't result in a so-called European champion. Instead, China wins as Europe hurts both itself and America. They make the user experience worse. They distort the digital marketplace by allowing less innovative and less efficient foreign competitors to simply steal from U.S. tech companies. In addition to attacking American tech companies, Europe is attacking free speech around the world, including here in America. Laws like the Digital Services Act and the Online Safety Act are the engines of global censorship regime targeting political speech disfavored by European bureaucrats. The censorship mechanism is simple. The DSA and the OSA effectively require social media platforms to change their terms of service to moderate more content. These companies have one set of standards that they apply globally because it's costly, impractical, and harmful to user privacy to change content moderation rules based on a user's location. So when platforms are forced to change their terms of service to comply with European laws, it affects what we see, what we read, what we say online here in America, infringing on Americans' First Amendment rights. And this is no accident. Even the New York Times, The Atlantic have acknowledged that these foreign censorship laws are intended to have global impact. And European actions have proven it. Again, just look at Mr. Breton's letter. Supporters say these laws make the online environment safer for children, something that we all agree with. We all want to protect kids. But censorship laws are never about disinformation or child safety or anything else. They're always about censoring criticism of the government. Social media is a relatively new technology, but censorship is as old as time. Misinformation, disinformation, hate speech labels are always used by the people in power to censor their critics. And my experience has taught me that today's misinformation is tomorrow's truth. And we have seen it time and time again. I always like to point out, everything the government told us about COVID turned out to be wrong. Everything our government told us about COVID. I'm not even talking about Europe here. Everything. They told us that the virus didn't come from a lab. Sure looks like it did. They told us it wasn't gain-of-function research done at the lab. Yes, it was. They told us it wasn't our tax money used at the lab. Yes, it was. They told us vaccines. They told us that the vaccinated can't get it. They told us the vaccinated can't transmit it. They told us masks work. They told us 6 feet social distance was based on science. And they told us this was the first virus in history where there's no such thing as natural immunity. They were 0 for 8. And yet they're going to define with some disinformation governance board what we can say, what we can tweet, what we can read, what we can post. You got to be kidding me. As RFK Jr. testified before our committee, never forgot what he said. He said, when you look at history, it is never the good guys who are for censorship. It is always the bad guys, and that's our concern. We need debate. The best way to answer bad speech, wrong speech, stupid speech, crazy speech, even hate speech is more speech. We need the First Amendment. Our committee will continue to move legislation that protects free speech from threats, including threats from abroad. With that, I now recognize our ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our witnesses. I imagine that in a hearing about threats to freedom of speech abroad, we might hear from a Russian dissident about Putin's massive violations of political freedom, or the death of Alexei Navalny in prison, or perhaps a Chinese pro-democracy activist about President Xi's attacks on free speech in Hong Kong, Tibet, Xinjiang, or the persecution trial of Jimmy Lai. Or maybe a journalist about the Saudi Crown Prince's assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post writer who demanded freedom from religious persecution and oppression in Saudi Arabia. But no, the dictators of the world have got nothing to fear from this hearing. The Republicans called it to attack our democratic allies in Europe. The star witness is not a human rights leader like Navalny, but a far-right, pro-Putin politician who leads the UK Reform Party, a party that has 4 members out of 650 members in the parliament. He calls England an authoritarian regime, while saying that Vladimir Putin is the world leader he admires the most. Well, this hearing mimics Vice President J.D. Vance, who went to the Munich Security Conference in February. In the first 2 minutes of his speech, whitewashed the world's leading autocratic regimes, proclaiming that the threat that worries him is not Russia, It's not China, he said, but rather it's our European allies. Amazing. Republicans are promoting far-right parties in Europe, like Alternative for Deutschland, Reform UK, and Rassemblement National Français, and ignoring massive repression in Russia, China, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and among all the autocrats of the world. Republicans are vilifying European liberal democracies simply for engaging in the kind of line-drawing exercises that we Americans engage in under our First Amendment with respect to the epidemic of child pornography, protecting children from other harmful content, defamatory speech, online scams and false advertising, and speech inciting riots and imminent lawless action. All forms of speech that the First Amendment does not protect and whose tricky contours must still be drawn by law. We could have a meaningful hearing on this complicated subject, but this hearing is just a drive-by hit against a strong Democratic ally to benefit a Donald Trump sycophant and wannabe. But it's even worse than this. Not only are our colleagues ignoring intensifying repression in the world's dictatorships, they're also trying to distract the world from the attack on freedom taking place right here in America every single day. Americans aren't worried about the EU or the Online Safety Act in the UK. We're not worried about white nationalists not having enough license to incite lynch mobs to set immigrants on fire in their bedrooms. Americans are worried that Donald Trump is working to rewrite and whitewash American history in our museums, our textbooks, and our national parks, to destroy PBS, NPR, and public broadcasting, to ban books in our libraries, and to censor any news stories critical of him by installing political henchmen in private broadcast rooms. Americans know that academic freedom is in danger when the administration cancels and withholds billions of dollars in scientific and medical research funding from American universities, even for urgent life-saving studies about breast cancer or heart attacks, as a way to force schools to impose government orthodoxy on curriculum, hiring, admissions, and any student and faculty speech that MAGA considers politically incorrect. Americans see Trump trying to harass, intimidate, control, and shut down the press, like ABC, CBS, NBC, NPR, and PBS. The Republican-controlled FCC essentially blackmailed media companies Skydance and Paramount into agreeing to install a spy, a monitor, a minder, I think the Brits might say, to police CBS news programs to make sure that they are being sufficiently Trumpy in giving us the news in order to get approval of a merger from FCC. Meanwhile, Trump sued 60 Minutes and CBS personally for $20 billion for the frivolous cause of action that he thought an interview with Kamala Harris was edited too favorably, and then walked away with a cool $16 million in a shakedown settlement for his library, all part of a now familiar pattern. When Trump doesn't like the news, he sues the broadcaster and unleashes the FCC on them until they pay up and agree to a government spy stationed in their office. Free speech is so much in danger in the U.S. today that if the government tries to violate our rights, we might not even be able to find a lawyer to defend ourselves because Trump is systematically exacting retribution against law firms that represent anyone on the other side of a case against him. Look, our country loves free speech. We fight for free speech. We fought for free speech, and we know it's in danger when students who are lawfully in the United States are taken off the street and arrested without warrants by masked federal agents in unmarked cars for writing an article or attending a rally that Stephen Miller doesn't like. Free speech is in danger when visitors to our country have their social media accounts screened at the border for any criticism of Donald Trump. Free speech is in danger when To Kill a Mockingbird, The Handmaid's Tale, 1984, and The Kite Runner are banned from our schools and libraries across the country, and even families defending our freedom abroad have to fight for their kids' right to read freely in public schools run by the Department of Defense. Freedom's in danger when the administration tramples the civil service rights of hundreds of thousands of nonpartisan expert civil servants These civil servants have been protected against political discrimination for more than a century to maintain the excellence and independence of our federal workforce, but they're now being fired simply for doing their jobs, like prosecuting violent criminals and insurrectionists who try to overthrow our government and attack our police officers, or because they honestly gave honest economic information and labor statistics to the public. These honorable civil servants are being fired because they won't be the political hacks Trump demands that they be. When private comments made by federal employees are scrutinized for anti-Trump bias and they can lose their jobs because of it, then we've entered the realm not just of Vladimir Putin, but of Joseph Stalin. Now, Mr. Trump and Mr. Farage both claim they're protectors of free speech, but they only want to protect speech they agree with. In the UK, Mr. Farage is openly promoting the abolition of the Human Rights Act of 1998 to be replaced with a British Bill of Rights that limits the right of free speech to British citizens and legally sanctioned residents. He complains that racist threats against immigrants are not protected free speech, while he proposes to strip migrants, tourists, and perhaps even
visiting American congresspeople of any free speech rights at all. I had my own close encounter with that when Mr. Farage and his team presented for more than an hour in a conversation we had about free speech. And after 3 minutes of talking, he cut me off and terminated the meeting because he didn't like what I was saying. That's the kind of free speech he's committed to. There is a free speech crisis in America today, but there's no free speech crisis in Britain. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has not shut down GB News, where Mr. Farage has his own show, just because Mr. Farage has used his airtime to call for banning peaceful protests that he disagrees with. No one has stopped him from going on Russian TV 17 times and saying also and repeating that the one world political leader he most admired was Vladimir Putin, even though Vladimir Putin is a war criminal and a dictator who has regularly interfered in other countries' democratic elections. No one has stopped Mr. Farage from parroting Putin's absurd talking points, like when Farage claimed that NATO, the US, and Britain provoked this war in Ukraine. For a man who fashions himself as some kind of a free speech martyr, Mr. Farage seems most at home with the autocrats and dictators of the world who are crushing freedom on earth. Mr. Farage wants to get rid of the Online Safety Act in his country, a law shepherded by the Conservative Party and implemented by the Labor Party, which bans child pornography online, protects children from harmful content, forbids non-consensual pornography and other unlawful content. He should go and advance the positions he's taking here in Congress today in Parliament, which is meeting today, if he's serious about it. To the people of UK who think this Putin-loving free speech imposter and Trump sycophant will protect freedom in your country, come on over to America and see what Trump and MAGA are doing to destroy our freedom, kidnap college students off the street, ban books from our libraries, militarize our police and unleash them against our communities, take over our universities, wreck our professional civil service, and turn the government into a money-making machine for Trump and his family. You might think twice before you let Mr. Farage make Britain great again. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I would just point out that the encounter that the ranking member had with Mr. Farage was a little different at my recollection than how it was described. And I would also point out that the gentleman alleges there's no free speech in America under President Trump, while his staff member is holding up countless number of articles criticizing the Trump administration. I think that's a little bit of a... Well, let's say that's not how I think it actually goes. So we now will introduce today's witnesses. We will start with the Right Honourable Nigel Farage. Mr. Farage is a member of Parliament from Clacton and the leader of the Reform UK Party. He's also a television...
We're going to leave this to take you outside the U.S. Capitol now, where survivors of convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein are gathered with members of Congress. We'll be hearing from Ro Khanna of California, Thomas Massey of Kentucky, and Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia.
And if folks could just please... calm down. People can speak when members of Congress are speaking. I just want to make sure that the victims and survivors are going to be heard today. I want to begin by thanking Brittany Henderson and Brad Edwards for their tireless work in the pursuit of justice. And I want to thank Sarah Drury on my team for working with them. Above all, I want to thank the survivors who are here today, whose courage and strength have brought us to this moment. I want to thank my co-lead, Congressman Thomas Massey, and Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene for standing with survivors here today. Today, as you can see, we're united in restoring trust in government. We're here not as partisans, we're here as patriots. We begin the work of bringing this country together, progressives, independents, moderates, and yes, MAGA supporters, to demand truth and justice. A nation that allows rich and powerful men to traffic and abuse young girls without consequence is a nation that has lost its moral and spiritual core. Americans are asking a very simple question. How is it possible that in the richest, most powerful country in the world, there are corrupt special interest forces, both foreign or domestic, that are preventing the release, that have a stranglehold on our government and are preventing the release of the full Epstein files? There is something that is rotten in Washington. Less than 1% of these files have been released. We are demanding today on the discharge petition that all of the files be released. We know we have 212 Democrats and we have 4 Republicans, courageous Republicans like Thomas Massey, Nancy Mace, who was so emotional yesterday after talking to the survivors, Congresswoman Boebert, and Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. We need just 2 more signatures to force the release. So we gather here on the steps of the Capitol to confront these corrupt forces. Today we stand with survivors. We stand against big money. We stand to protect America's children. That is really what this is about. I now want to bring up my Republican colleague, Thomas Massey. He has shown so much courage, so much leadership. And I saw some people, I say the same thing about Marjorie Taylor Greene. She has shown so much courage on this issue. I saw some people when I was coming here calling her names. We've got to stop that. We've got to stop the partisanship on this issue. This is an issue where they both have shown real courage and leadership, and I appreciate them joining us today. Congressman Massey.
I want to thank my colleague Ro Khanna for co-leading this effort to bring transparency and justice for these victims. I hope my colleagues are watching this press conference. I want them to think, what if this was your sister? What if this was your daughter? When these survivors speak, the Washington establishment is asking the American public to believe something that is not believable. They're asking you to believe that 2 individuals created hundreds of victims and they acted alone, and that the DOJ has no idea of who else might have been involved, that nobody else did anything that rose to a criminal enterprise. The American people know that's not true. Now, the Speaker of the House just offered a fig leaf to my colleagues. They're going to vote on a non-binding resolution today that does absolutely nothing. I appreciate the efforts of my colleague James Comer, who's leading the Oversight Committee. They may find some information, but they're allowing the DOJ to curate all of the information that the DOJ is giving them. If you've looked at the pages they've released so far, they're heavily redacted. Some pages are entirely redacted. And 97% of this is already in the public domain. So I'm calling on my colleagues. Be one of the next 2 who sponsors this discharge petition. I think it's shameful that this has been called a hoax. Hopefully today we can clear that up. This is not a hoax. This is real. There are real survivors. There are real victims to this criminal enterprise. And the perpetrators are being protected because they're rich and powerful and political donors to the establishment here in Washington, D.C. So today we're standing with these survivors, and we're giving them a voice, and I want to close by thanking them. They are brave. I hope they encourage other survivors to come forward and to tell their stories, not just of Jeffrey Epstein and Maxwell, but anywhere in the country. This is a message that we are sending. This is a litmus test. Can we drain the swamp? Are there people who are outside of the reach of the law? I don't think there should be. So hopefully today we'll get 2 more signatures on the discharge petition. That's all we need. And with that, I want to introduce the bravest woman in Congress, Marjorie Taylor Greene. I find it interesting that the 3 Republican co-sponsors are women. These are women standing up for women. And Marjorie was the first to do it. And I think she deserves all of our gratitude for breaking that barrier and leading the way for the other Republicans. Hopefully they can find their spines as well. And with that, I give you Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Good morning. This is my 5th year in Congress, and this is the largest press conference that I've seen since I've been here. And this is because this is an issue that matters so much to Americans. This is an issue that doesn't have political boundaries. It's an issue that Republicans and Democrats should never fight about. As a matter of fact, it's such an important issue that it should bring us all together. It's grieved me to watch the arguments and debates take place among my colleagues and even the administration. I think this is something that was worth fighting for. You see, the women behind me are going to tell you stories that you've never heard before. These are unimaginable horrors that they've lived with for their entire lives since they were very, very young. But these are also similar stories that many children, teenagers, women, and even men are enduring nightmares right now as we speak. You see, these women have been fighting since the 1990s. I heard one woman tell us yesterday since 1996. And they have carried with them shame. But I want to tell you something. The shame does not fall on these brave, courageous women. The shame falls on every single person that coldly turned a blind eye to their abuse. The shame falls on every single person that enabled it. The shame falls on every single person that took money to continue it. And the shame falls on the people in power over the past several decades that protected the monster, Jeffrey Epstein, and his cabal that continued a nightmare. Those people deserve the shame. And today we are coming forward and we are going to fight like hell for these women, because we have to fight like hell for those that are enduring sexual abuse and are living in a prison of shame. Anyone that is being abused, it is not your fault. You should live with no guilt or fear or shame. All of the fault belongs to the evil people that do these things to the innocent. This is the most important fight we can wage here in Congress, is fighting for innocent people that never receive justice. And the women behind me have never received justice. And do you want to know why? It's because Jeffrey Epstein somehow was able to walk among the most rich, powerful people, not only in America, but foreign countries. Yesterday, I heard countries like Saudi Arabia, Russia, and even Israel, and other countries. The truth needs to come out, and the government holds the truth. The cases that are sealed hold the truth. Jeffrey Epstein's estate holds the truth. The FBI, the DOJ, and the CIA holds the truth. And the truth we are demanding come out on behalf of these women, but also as a strong message to every innocent child, teenager, woman, and man that is being held captive in abuse. This should never happen in America, and it should never be a political issue that divides us. And I want to thank Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie for doing something brave, crossing political boundaries for a very important fight. And I'm honored to join both of them. And I'm honored that Nancy Mace and Lauren Boebert signed the discharge petition along with myself. And I ask my Republican colleagues not to choose just one path for justice and transparency and accountability, but I ask my Republican colleagues to choose every path for justice and accountability and transparency. And with that, I'd like to bring back Congressman Ro Khanna to start this important press conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congresswoman Green, for your courage and for being here, and thank you again to Congressman Massey for co-leading it. I now would like to introduce two people who have been fighting this for decades. They haven't had their voice heard. The victims haven't been heard. They haven't just been on this in the last few months. They've been doing this in the wilderness for years.